And hello to whoever is out there and decides to listen to this particular video response thing, whatever you want to call it. My name is artsy Lupus, and I'm a writer person who makes videos also on the interwebs. And this particular video is basically a response to the responses to my latest videos, which were the Beastars videos. There's 6 of them. So, basically, those Beastars videos, I'm going to be going through the comments, not all the comments, and actually not really talking about the specific comments, but more the spirit of comments. So I don't really want to talk about, I don't want to reference specific people, also because sometimes comments were repeated. There were some things that were voiced multiple times, but in different ways, or with different tones or whatever, and so I sort of thought of rather making them but more unified, in a sense. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, going through each of the videos. So basically, if you want to skip ahead to the commentary about a specific video, all you have to do is basically do that. You just skip ahead to whichever one it is. The chapters will be all listed on YouTube. And then at the end, I'm also actually going to speak about a little bit of the Season 3, Part 1 of the anime that is so far out, because I figured, why not? So let me first just start off with this little bit of an introduction thing of saying, like, why I did this particular series. So I wrote my master's dissertation about Beastars. It was called Meat, Sex, and Power, an analysis of the world of Beastars. So I was more so looking at the world of Beastars, things like world building, stuff like that, rather than the central plot. So while, yes, I did speak about characters, I didn't necessarily speak about their particular motivations or ideas or anything like that. It was more how they contributed to the sort of plot, rather the world as a whole. So a lot of my area is in what's called animal studies. That's my main area, thing that I'm most interested in. There were various types of academic theories and what have you that I discuss in the actual MA. If you wanted a much more formal academic discussion, I would rather say you should read the MA. These videos are more edutainment type of videos. So I sort of informalize a lot of the things that I was speaking about in the MA. They're also much shorter. Each one's roughly 10 or so minutes, and the dissertation is about 50,000 words, so it's a little bit longer. Now also, just to say, if you're interested in learning more about animal studies in general, I've got a whole bunch of videos on this channel that are basically lecture videos, and there's going to be more of those, because I've done a lot of that kind of stuff, talking about animal studies and sort of animal ethics, ecofeminism, also some like post-colonial theory. I've got various things about literary theory, so if you wanted to check out any of those, you could. And then also, of course, if you like these videos, and if you might like future ones, you never know, you can always check out my Patreon. It's in the description. Yeah, let's get on with it. So firstly, before I actually go into individual videos, I want to sort of have a general response. This is not actually the introduction, this is just talking generally. These are the kinds of comments that I did sometimes get, or at least things that were in multiple comments that I feel are worthy of addressing in a more generalized sense. So, just with, like, basically all of these videos, I'm going to be popping out of all of these, just basically bullet points on each of these. So in terms of the general, the first of these points, you're reading too much into it. I got this comment a couple of times, basically along those lines, saying, oh, you're reading too much, this is just an anime / manga, or whatever it happened to be that they were responding. Mostly they said anime, even though I'm actually mostly speaking about the manga a lot of the time. Although, obviously the visuals are from the anime because that's, animated rather than static. Anyway, so basically this concept, right? You're reading too much into it. I'll just immediately say that I think that this is an extremely pointless and very narrow-minded criticism of literally anything, because that's what analysis is. You can say you're reading too much into it about literally any text, any movie, any book, any game. You can say that. You can, oh, you're reading too much into it. That's the point. That's the point. I'm analyzing it very closely. It's called a close reading. I'm looking at it very, very closely. So the idea that, oh, you're reading too much into it, I think is just a pointless and reductive way of trying to critique something like this. I just don't think it's a valid criticism. Like, you can analyze anything, it doesn't matter, which kind of goes into the second point here, where I say that different types of analysis do exist. Now, I got like some people being like, "Oh, you're talking about sort of things external to Beastars, not only Beastars itself," and that's because my approach was not actually formalistic in nature. I wasn't looking at the formal characteristics or even really the content as much as I was its relation, the form and content's relation to external things. So, for instance, when I'm talking about the depiction of meat in Beastars, I will relate it to the depiction, or at least the reality of meat in our world, because I'm not just looking at that. This is called a context-centered approach. So it's just another way of analyzing media. If you want an analysis that focuses solely on the form or the content, then that's just not really me. I'm sorry about that, I'm afraid. But if you do want that kind of analysis, I will say that's probably most analysis on like YouTube and the internet and what have you, sort of non-academic analyses. Most of them probably will be very sort of formalistic and very much focused on the content and the form rather than the context of the situation. But that's fine. It's just not my particular approach that I like to do, because you're allowed to have more than one approach to analyzing media. That's the nature of a diversity of thought, because otherwise wouldn't it just be boring if everyone was doing things the exact same way? So yeah. Now the next one here, I said my approach is oriented around a more realist approach. Now when I say that, I got a couple of people saying things like, "Oh well, it's allegorical or it's metaphorical." And the thing is, yes, you can look at it. Obviously, you can look at any text from a metaphorical, allegorical, not necessarily allegorical, but always from a metaphorical perspective. Also, because language is fundamentally metaphorical. But I chose not to. See, the reason for that is because I wanted to analyze Beastars, the world of Beastars, not as an allegory or a sort of a metaphor for the human world, but rather as something of a commentary on the real world, which is a very, very different thing, right? So I was looking at it as, what if this world was real? So when someone says, "Oh, but the carnivore herbivore thing in terms of relationships is about, it's a metaphor for how relationships can be," I'm like, to me that makes it much, much less interesting as a text. To me personally, I want to look at the text as if this is a realistic sort of depiction of what a world in which there were no humans and instead there were animals. That kind of a depiction, what would that world be like? Which to me is much more interesting, specifically from the animal studies perspective from which I am analyzing things. To me that is much more interesting than sort of saying, "Oh, it's a metaphor." To me, that is very, I wouldn't say it's reductive, I just think it's a different approach, right? And it's not an approach that I favor in this particular case. Obviously, you can analyze it from that perspective, that is fine, but I do feel that when you look at Beastars as something metaphorical, then you are actually eliminating a lot of the animalism that is within it, which is the thing that, as an animal studies person, that's what I'm looking at. So to me, I wanted to look at it specifically from that perspective, from saying it is an animal thing, and what a realistic world in which animals became people, what would that be like, rather than sort of saying, "Oh, well, it's all just a metaphor for something else," which that's also not true. You can't just say that. You can't say, "Oh, well, it is a metaphor for something else." That's not actually how literature works in general, right? There are different interpretations. Different people have different interpretations, including interpretations that are separate from the interpretations of the author. But that's its whole own other thing. And if you do want to look into that kind of stuff, if you're not familiar with it, you can look into things like Death of the Author. I've made various videos about stuff like that. So if you wanted to look at the more academic-y stuff, you can look at that. But that's just not how I look at it. Okay, so that's actually kind of a blanket thing for, a bunch of these things where people would say to me, "Oh, but it's a metaphor." So this is essentially my response to that argument, because I'm just not interested in it from that perspective. You can be, and you can find other analyses that do that, but I won't. All right, the next point here, I think this was really just one person who said this, but I just thought it was a bit of a silly point, specifically with regards to my analysis of this world, in which someone said, you should completely ignore Beast Complex. Now, for those who don't know what Beast Complex is basically a spin-off, which actually came out before Beastars and then continued after Beastars. As a matter of fact, like the latest volume just came out, like a week or two before recording this, which I'd already done all of these videos, so I was unaware that was coming out. Maybe I should actually have a look at that, and maybe I could even do a video about what's in those Beast Complex, that particular volume. But the Beast Complex series, essentially, are self-contained chapters, all of which are about something within the world of Beastars. So actually, to me, it was a very invaluable thing, because I was analyzing the world of Beastars rather than the narrative as a whole. Now, obviously, the Beastars, narrative should be able to stand on its own, and I think it does. However, I would say there are things that, in terms of the world, allow for greater elaboration when you do look at it through Beast Complex as well. Also, because, as a matter of fact, in the Season 3, there is even a scene from a Beast Complex chapter that was thrown in there. I'm not going to say which for spoiler reasons, for those who are interested, but there is that in there, although it's much weaker than the Beast Complex chapter. So, like, they took a portion of it and not all of it, which I think is a bit disappointing. But, that's that. Okay, now, the last little thing here for the general remarks is many people simply misunderstood what they watch or don't acknowledge scope. Some people seemingly just misunderstand what I'm talking about. I'll talk about this later. Like, for instance, in the next section where I'm talking about the Beastars and the Re-animalisation of Meat video, I said in that basically something like animalization is like with humanization, right? Basically just to establish what I mean by the term animalization. If you animalize something, it's like humanizing something. But I wasn't saying humanization, I was just using it as an example to explain what animalization is. And then someone went on a whole rant about how we shouldn't humanize animals. And I'm like, I didn't say that. Maybe pay attention to what you're watching before going on a rant that is actually nonsensical, because you are responding to something I didn't say. A bunch of people said that, and also some people who just didn't acknowledge the scope of things. For instance, quite a couple of people responded to the video in which I was talking about Jack, specifically Jack and dogs in the world of Beastars, and then some people were like, well, what about chickens? Because they're also domestic animals, like Jack and dogs. And I'm like, yes, you're very correct there, but I was talking about Jack. Like, this video is called Beastars and the Problem of Jack. So the scope of that particular video was Jack and dogs. Not chickens, not domesticated rabbits, not cows. It was just dogs. So that is just something that I felt, I got quite a couple of comments like that where people were talking beyond the scope of what I was talking about, where I'm like, I spoke about one thing and they're like, oh, well, you didn't talk about this. I'm like, yeah, because I was speaking about this other thing. So that's just something that I feel does happen sometimes, but I think that's also quite common for YouTube, but it is something just worth noting. Okay, now let's go into the actual specific ones. First one, Beastars and the Re-animalisation of Meat. So the first of the points that I got here, why do you say humans lack a biological craving for meat, but humans need meat? Okay, now this actually did lead to quite a lengthy discussion where I think it's a vocabulary problem a lot of the time, in which what I'm talking about is misconstrued through many different reasons, because people also interpret different words in different ways. Now, this just happens. Now, when I speak about specifically biological cravings, I'm talking about the actual yearning to have meat, right? The desire to have meat. A human will not just instinctively eat meat if they've never eaten meat before. Okay, I had one person quite say something along those lines very derisively, being like, oh yeah, sure. But if someone is raised vegan, they never have cravings for meat. That's just how cravings work. You don't crave things that you've never experienced. You don't crave foods that you've never experienced. Like, if you've never eaten an apple, you will never sit there and go, oh, I really want an apple. Because you don't know what apples taste like. You don't have cravings for things that you haven't experienced already in terms of food, because you can't really miss what you have never had. Now I'm talking obviously in terms of food, because if someone's going to try and be pedantic with me and sort of say, oh, well, what about love? Some people have never experienced love. I'm talking about food. Don't try and be pedantic about this. Okay, so that's what I'm saying when I'm saying the biological craving for meat. If you've never eaten meat, you will just never have a biological yearning for it. You won't yearn it. The reason that you yearn it once you have started eating it is because you like the taste, generally. Or if there is a specific deficiency in your body, like that's a common thing, say, with pregnancy, where people then want to eat often really weird things because they have a specific deficiency in their body, sort of tells them what to eat. That is like a thing that happens. But humans mostly do not require meat to survive. Now, I will say there are some people who have a specific range of issues, generally a horrible set of allergies or specific sensitivities that mean that they can't eat a bunch of other things, and so they kind of need meat to survive. However, human beings do not generally need meat, and also because we have things like supplements, we can also, if there's anything you don't have, you can supplement it with something else, which someone will then say, well, that's not natural. There's nothing natural about the way we eat meat, so that's a nonsense argument, trying to claim, oh, it's natural. There's nothing natural about the way that we eat meat. There really isn't. Not anymore. Unless you're literally going out and hunting meat yourself and eating it, there's nothing natural. Even then, like if you're using a gun, I mean, that's not natural. Come now. Wouldn't a real hunter grab it with their bare hands? But most people aren't able to do that because that's quite difficult to do because we're not evolved for that, which will be my next point here. But yeah, that is something to keep in mind. Humans don't actually need meat unless under very specific circumstances, and when they do have certain deficiencies, you can supplement it with other things. The people who claim things like, oh, there's special magic proteins that only exist in meat that humans need, that's not true. Vegan societies have existed for thousands of years. They're still alive. Vegans are able to continually subsist. If a vegan is able to survive, that kind of, disproves the idea that humans require meat to live. If a vegan is able to survive and be healthy, like, are vegans not human then? Is that the argument? Vegans aren't humans, so that's why. So it's a very, very silly argument. All right. So that's sort of the difference between craving and need. They are different things. Craving something is not the same as needing it. And also, when I was speaking about that, I'm specifically speaking about, for instance, in Beastars, the way that, they smell like blood, they smell meat, and then they become intoxicated. That is what I'm talking about, that kind of biological craving for the thing. But people misunderstand what I say and then argue with a straw man version of my argument because they don't understand what I mean, which can make sense when you don't understand the specific terminology or if you refuse to understand. That's also a thing. So the next thing here is that humans are evolved to hunt. No, they're not. I had some people tell me that. Oh, they're evolved to hunt. Like my favorite one was someone who said, because there's play behavior in humans. Humans play, which is actually not a hunting thing. It's a socialization thing. Herbivores play. Baby herbivores play with each other. And then also they said specifically, things like tag, catch games. But that's a social thing that is developed by human beings. Dogs who are carnivores, or let's say rather, let's go with an obligate carnivore, right? Like a lion. Lion cubs play. They don't play tag because that requires an understanding of rules that are very, very definitively oriented around whose turn it is to do this or that. So the idea that, because humans like play tag or something like that, that they're biologically programmed to evolve, to like hunt, that's just nonsense. We are not biologically evolved to hunt, because if you just look at our bodies, we're not. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have the legs needed to actually hunt something down. I would say that it's much more likely that humans were basically opportunistic scavengers, right? In olden times, we definitely ate meat. We've never been carnivores. We've always been omnivores. Okay, that's also another thing. People try to claim, if you sort of say that we shouldn't eat meat, they're like, humans are omnivores. Yeah, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we're not omnivores, or at least not naturally omnivores, but we can choose to go against that. Which, it's really weird how, like, people who really, really vehemently want to defend meat can't seem to understand arguments, which is very interesting. But anyway, so if we were evolved to hunt, we would actually have biological capabilities that allowed us to hunt. It would also be that we could probably eat things that are raw if we could hunt. And other than red meat, and not all red meats, but other than red meat, human beings can't really digest raw food for the most part. Like, when things are raw, they often have to be prepared in a specific way. But, for instance, a lion can grab something and rip pieces of it out and chew it. Humans can't do that. We don't really have the stomachs for it. So in all likelihood, we were more like scavengers. We probably ate bugs and snails and small mammals, things that couldn't get away easily. That's probably what we hunted, if you want to even call it hunting. But that's not what we did. And then also, just as a little, this is my sort of snide little remark, I suppose. If you sort of say, oh, well, humans do hunt, that we hunt because we have tools. We have the brains that have allowed us to develop tools which then made it easier to basically hunt and to eliminate the kinds of barriers to entry that, for instance, actual carnivores have. For instance, making bows and arrows or guns or whatever it is that we happen to use at a particular time to hunt. But those things, it's not like we biologically have a gun attached to our arm. We didn't evolve guns. We made guns. We developed it through civilization, not through nature. So it's not evolution. But anyway, that's also a thing. A bunch of people seem to not really know what evolution is, which is very interesting. But anyway, the next thing, I did briefly mention this before, but the idea of humanization versus animalization. In this video, I speak about the idea that basically we de-animalize animals when we turn them into meat, right? So what I'm saying there is we don't see the cow. We see the pieces of meat that are prepared for us. And then, for instance, when you try to re-animalize it, say at the dinner table, and you say, that used to be alive, people often are not very happy with you bringing that kind of stuff up because it's seen as not dinner talk. It's not dinner table talk, right? You don't bring up the pain and suffering that an animal went through because you want to remove the idea of the animal. You want to make the animal absent. You only want to see the meat that is remaining. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about animalization and de-animalization and re-animalization. And I was talking about how Beastars re-animalizes because you cannot deny the fact that the thing you are eating is a person in Beastars. And then, of course, someone went on a rant at me about how we shouldn't humanize animals, even though I never said that. It's fine, whatever. The reason I said the term humanization is as a point of comparison. Animalizing animals means recognizing them as animals. Humanizing a human means recognizing them as a human. I was using it as a point of comparison. I never once said that we need to humanize animals. That would be ridiculous. We should not humanize animals. Although I will say, but this is a different point, we should, basically understand that humans and animals are not so super distinct from one another. Like a lot of the time when we say, oh, well, you're humanizing an animal, or you're anthropomorphizing an animal when you say they do these certain things. Like, for instance, if an animal feels joy, animals can feel joy. That's actually an animal thing, not a human thing. Humans happen to be animals that are capable of experiencing joy. But that's a whole different conversation. The next one is that humans have a different consciousness to animals, which I think people use as justification. So, animals are stupider than us and we can eat them. That's not really a justification. That's just an excuse. So I would say that's just a pointless argument. Like, okay, we have a different consciousness to animals. So, but different humans have different consciousnesses to each other. So does that also justify eating other people? That's just kind of a pointless thing. Now, one person brought up something which I know they're trying to have it as like a gotcha moment, but the problem is they probably have never spoken actually to like academic sort of vegan people. A lot of vegans, this is also just a thing to say, a lot of vegans feel that it's wrong, but they don't necessarily have the academic understanding to be able to argue their point very well, which means that they argue their points badly. That is a thing that happens. A lot of people do argue their points poorly because they feel something, but they don't actually know how to explain it, and that is a big problem that happens. So a lot of the time, when meat eaters try to argue against vegans, they'll bring up this idea that, what about plants? They're also alive. And then usually a lot of vegans don't actually have an answer to that. The thing is, because this was a person that said, oh, well, aren't you deplantifying plants when you eat them? No, you're not. Nobody tries to hide the fact that you're eating a plant. The whole idea of de-animalization is that you're basically pretending it's not an animal so that you can enjoy eating it. That's what I mean by that. Nobody feels bad about eating a plant. Now the thing is, and I put here next to, what about deplantifying? I say critical plant studies and reverence for life. These are important points. There is actually a big difference between plants and animals in terms of eating them in many different ways. And there is actually plant ethics. Critical plant studies basically does look at that. Also, a lot of the time when we talk about plant ethics, you could basically instead use the term environmental ethics, because that's a lot of the time what you're talking about, trying to create the optimal situations in which they can thrive. Now, is it ethical to, for instance, raise plants in the way that we do? No, I would argue it isn't. However, I would say it is less, or rather more ethical, so less unethical to do so than what we do with animals. It's basically a utilitarian calculus thing, because we cannot live a completely and utterly ethical existence. It is physically impossible. Human beings require living matter to survive. We have to eat things that are alive. However, we can choose the level of consciousness of the creature or whatever that we happen to eat. Plants are not as conscious as animals. For instance, they do not have pain receptors. They generally do not have brains, right? There's a lot of things that they do not have. There's another very interesting thing about plants that does differentiate them, and that is that plants are segmented beings. When you cut off, for instance, let's say you pick an apple off a tree, do you kill the tree? No, you don't, because actually they are biologically programmed to create and drop these fruit, because fruit are used as part of it's part of their reproductive cycle. Seeds are inside fruit, so actually the point of fruit is to be eaten, not necessarily by humans, but by something, and then those things will carry the seeds somewhere else. This is also why a lot of seeds can actually survive the digestive tract of a lot of animals, because a lot of animals will eat them and then poop them out somewhere else where they can grow. That is a thing. So trying to claim, that plants and animals are, if you eat plants, then that's also unethical. Yes, it is, but it's more ethical, I would argue, for many reasons. For instance, you do not kill the plant most of the time. However, of course, there are some times in which you do kill the plant. Some things require killing the plant. That, I would say, is more unethical. And then, of course, you also get the idea that some plants, a lot of plants actually, have a natural life and death cycle. They die during winter, and then they come back alive. The same plant basically goes into a sense of almost hibernation. That is not what happens to animals. When an animal dies, it's dead. So, yeah. But modern agriculture is often very unethical. In many ways, it's also terrible for the environment. So, there's many reasons why it is actually a problem. But, yeah. And that's why I talk about that. This is critical plant study stuff. And then, just a thing that's worth keeping in mind is the concept of reverence for life. I'm not going to go really deep into this, but it's the idea of having respect and reverence for that which is alive, and trying your best to minimize the kind of harm that you do. And I would say that you minimize the harm that you do by not eating meat. So if you don't eat meat, you minimize the harm. Now you might say, as a lot of meat eaters like to claim, they like to go, oh, well, then you're eating plants. Do you not realize that the animals also eat plants? So you're basically responsible for, if you are a meat eater, you are also responsible for more plants being eaten than, because here's one of the sad little realities about animals. Animals are really, really bad at converting food into weight. Really, really bad at it. If you eat, think of humans. If you eat a kilogram of food, or I don't know, American things like a pound of food. I don't know if that's a lot. I don't know the imperial system. If you eat a pound of food, you don't put on a pound of weight. That's not how it works. So it's actually very, very, very inefficient to eat animals, because you consume so much plant life for very, very little food that comes out of it. So there's many aspects that go into this. If you want to learn more, I have videos about animal studies, but I don't want to carry on going into this because I want to get to the rest of these points. Okay. The next thing, opportunistic meat-eating behaviors exist. Now, yes, this is very true in terms of the real world, right? A lot of herbivores will actually eat meat if given the opportunity to do so. Now, a lot of people pointed this out with regards to Beastars. They were like, oh, well, actually, deers have been known to eat meat. Yes, but not in Beastars. In Beastars, there is no such thing as omnivores. This can go into actually the next point where I say, yeah, what about omnivores? There are no omnivores in Beastars. And I would say, obviously, the reason for that, literally, is because it is easier to have two sides than to have something that messes with that dichotomy. It's easier to have herbivores, carnivores, than it would be to have a middle thing. Although then, of course, hybrids got added later, and they kind of messed with that and made it much, I would say, sillier, but that's fine. So, yes, these behaviors do exist in a lot of herbivores, but not in Beastars. So when you're trying to criticize the analysis of Beastars and when I talk about carnivores and herbivores in Beastars, it's not the same as me talking about carnivores and herbivores in the real world, because Beastars is a work of fiction, and so the rules are different there. Anyway, so the last of the points here about re-animalisation, this video, is what about the victimization of carnivores, which someone pointed out that I kind of ignored, that carnivores also get, they do get victimized. Now that does happen, that is true. There are cases in Beastars, now this is obviously talking about Beastars specifically, there are cases in Beastars of like, people that hunt down carnivores who have specific furs, because, you know, you can skin an animal and then have a pretty fur. That is true. But what I'm speaking about in this particular thing isn't really victimization, it's specifically meat eating, right? When I was talking about this, I was talking about meat, not about victimization and stuff like that. I wasn't talking about the precarity of being a carnivore or versus being a herbivore. I was talking about specifically meat eating behaviors. Now, there are actually instances of carnivore like meat in Beastars, but they're very, very small. There's not that many of them. It's just not a very big thing. Most of the victimization of carnivores is social. Other aspects, which sort of relate more into sort of racial concepts, which I didn't really discuss the racial concepts much in any of these videos. I did a little bit in my dissertation, though. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next video, which is the Beastars and the problem of Jack. Now, I did also briefly mention this, where I said, what about other domestic animals? You know, chickens and cows, they also exist in Beastars. Yes, this particular video was actually about Jack, though, and dogs. This is a scope issue, which I did speak about earlier. That's just a very, very short point, but just to say, yeah, I understand that other domestic animals do exist, and that they're in Beastars. But we don't really learn much about them in Beastars. It's like we don't know how cows came about because we don't learn that. We don't learn about how chickens came about. We are told a bit about how dogs came about. That's why I was speaking about dogs in this video. Okay, the next one, dogs are not descended from the grey wolf. Yes, I said that dogs are descended from the grey wolf because I was using sort of common expression. Now this is actually also kind of a general issue that I have seen with some people. People like to be pedants, which I would say is not a very beneficial means of criticizing something. Because as soon as someone corrects themselves, your criticism is out the window. So yes, strictly speaking, dogs and grey wolves are descended from a common ancestor. They're not actually descended from the grey wolf. Congratulations to the person who pointed this out. I do know that. I was using sort of common parlance. But yes, strictly speaking, that is correct in terms of the evolution of the wolf versus the dog. In terms of the real world, that is true. But these kinds of arguments you sometimes get where someone will say, well, strictly speaking, and then as soon as you correct that, then there's not really anything to respond to that. So it's not really a very beneficial, it's just being a pedant, really, which I think is not very helpful. I understand in academia it can be because you have to be very, very specific about your words, but, whatever. Now, these are just some things people have sort of suggested that I thought could be interesting to just bring up. Someone said maybe dogs come from an experiment. Maybe they do. We don't learn anything about that, but that could be an interesting point. I would love if dogs were more explored in Beastars. They're sadly not. We don't learn that much. But what we do learn, I think, is interesting. And someone also said maybe dogs came from like a less democratic period of Beastars history, like more of like a fascist time when they created them. That's also possible, but I don't actually think it's going to necessarily be true because at least the scale of time in Beastars seems to be quite weird. Like, it's sort of implied that it was like 100 years ago that this big war was, which was not very long ago for society to have so fundamentally changed. So I don't think that that's true, but it could be an interesting point. So that's all I really have. The Jack video, to be fair, is probably the jokiest video. I mean, I call him Fido Hitler at one point. That's, well, I use that expression. It clearly wasn't a particularly serious video in comparison to some of the others. Now, the next one was Beastars and the gender of animal groups. Now, this video was talking about how, there are femininity and masculinity aspects within Beastars where it is generally the carnivores are coded as masculine and herbivores are coded as feminine. Now, yeah, that is just an interesting little case. However, a lot of the arguments were not really about that. People took umbrage with my specific thing of saying that Zootopia is a race allegory. It's I would say it very much is quite a poor race allegory. There's a lot of aspects of it that are quite iffy. And as soon as you sort of point some of those things out, where it's things like, certain people aren't allowed into certain places, or the specific language that is used a lot of the time, things like, very, very sort of generalized statements that are made about things. Now, some people then try to say, oh, well, it's talking about discrimination in general. And yes, except that it's using the language of American racism. So a lot of it is very, very much how America filters the concept of racism. So I would say it very much is a race allegory, but that's what makes it a poor race allegory. But as someone said, they sort of said, I'm just calling Beastars, Zootopia a race allegory. It's not just a race allegory. There's a lot more in there. It's also propaganda, but there's a lot more in there than just the race allegory stuff. I was just pointing out that specific thing of the dichotomy between prey and predator animals is pretty much a race allegory, but not a very good one. That's just my point there. And also just to say for those, because I saw some people being like, I don't understand the people who say that Zootopia is a race allegory. So many people do see it as a race allegory that it even has a point on Wikipedia. I'm not the first person to say this. I'm not the first person to think this. I'm not the first person to criticize this. So that is just something to keep in mind. Now, the thing when it comes to Beastars as a race allegory, it's a bit more complicated because I kind of don't really see Beastars as allegorical. I did speak about that in like my MA. In these videos, so that's also one of the fundamental problems of these videos versus the dissertation. The MA dissertation has a lot of room to breathe and speak about things, whereas these videos were like 10 minutes each. So sometimes I would just say things and move on. And some people obviously take issue with those, and I understand that. Now, with Beastars, I don't take Beastars to be a pure race allegory. It isn't. There's a lot of other stuff going on in there. I actually don't really take Beastars as a race allegory. I think it's too problematic to be a race allegory. Because if you do take it as a race allegory, you can always say, obviously, oppressor versus oppressed, except that oppressor and oppressed tend to be racial groups. So if we're going to rather use the more neutral term oppressor and oppressed, I wonder who would be the oppressor and who would be the oppressed. But if you were to use those terms instead of saying, say people of color and white, instead of saying that, it still becomes problematic. Because then the oppressed group, right, which is carnivores, that group is biologically dangerous. And there are too many things that make it non-allegorical. There are too many things that make it a weak allegory. That's why I don't really take it as something metaphorical, allegorical. I rather take it as something realist. I take the world as something, the world of Beastars, as something that is realistic within its own logic. And that is why I analyze it in that particular way and not as an allegory. When I mention allegorical aspects, it's mostly as a very short thing before I move on to something else. For instance, literally this video that I'm talking about is called The Gender of Animal Groups. It's not about race. I just happened to mention that sort of offhand, I believe, and some people took it as a problem. Now the next thing, hybrids and psychopathy. Now, there's only a bit of the season 3 out so far, but when it comes to the manga, it does suggest that Melon is psychopathic because of his hybrid status. And also his taste thing, which you haven't really seen much in the anime, but he has a taste thing, like a problem with taste. He has to pour sauce over everything to have any kind of taste at all. And that's, like, it's weird because he acts that way, and then Legacy is concerned that similar things might happen with his kid, if he has a kid with Haru, except that his mom was a hybrid, so she wasn't a psychopath. She was extremely depressed and eventually took her own life, but that wasn't because of her being a hybrid. It was, or not biologically because it was of a hybrid, it was because of the societal stigma around being a hybrid, which is not the same as what Melon's issues seem to be, psychologically at least. So the main thing here actually is that it's just underdeveloped. There isn't enough, and I also actually say that in my dissertation. Like, I don't have a video that's specifically about hybrids, because I find them to be very underdeveloped and quite a weak entry into the Beastars world. I think that it actually messes up with a lot of the things that were in Beastars. I think it makes it a lot less interesting a world that hybrids can even exist. That is, of course, my perspective. Someone else will disagree, and that's fine. Now, someone also pointed out, also seeming like a gotcha kind of thing, being like, oh, you can't compare Melon and Legacy's mom, because Melon is the hybrid of a herbivore and a carnivore, and Legacy's mom is two carnivores, completely different. Except that Legacy's mom is the hybrid of a poisonous lizard, a Komodo dragon, and a wolf, so a mammal and a lizard. So why would that be so fundamentally incompatible with the other kind of hybrid? And once again, this comes to the thing of, we only ever really hear about two hybrids in the entirety of Beastars. So it's underdeveloped. There isn't enough information. We need to have more information if we actually want to discuss this properly, but there just isn't, because it's very underdeveloped and kind of sucky. Now, the last little thing is, someone pointed this out. It's a very interesting question, actually. What about small carnivores and masculine representation? So small carnivores, are they still represented as masculine? Now, the thing is, there aren't really any small carnivore main characters that get enough time to really be shown as masculine or feminine presenting, which is disappointing. Like, I wish that there were more, small animals and more of, like, say, large herbivores to see, would they then be more masculine presented? But even, for instance, in the manga, this is kind of excluded from the anime, but in the actual manga, the first time we sort of see Melon, he kills an elephant. We see him killing an elephant quite easily as well. An elephant is huge. They are powerful. That's also one of the fundamental unrealistic aspects, obviously. Like, when I say, this world doesn't have omnivores, it also doesn't have nuance in terms of animal groups. Because, yes, lions are very strong, except that elephants are stronger. If one elephant goes up against one lion, that elephant's winning. 100% the elephant is winning. And we just don't get to see that, because even when we see an elephant, the elephant easily gets killed by Melon, who is, yes, he's a hybrid, but he is essentially coded as a carnivore. So, even when there are big herbivores, they still seem to be weak, which is a bit disappointing. Like, I think that there could have been more nuance, but that's the problem with, as Beastars continued, it became weaker as a narrative. Anyway, let's move on to the next of the videos. So, Beastars and Meaty Intercourse. The first of these, someone was like, oh, how can meat be connected to masculinity? Oh, in many, many ways, my friend. Masculinity has been connected to meat for a very, very long time. When you look at societies all over the world, generally, if there was meat, it went to the men. Men are supposed to have meat. Meat represents vitality. It represents strength. These are things that men need to do, right? It's men who have to be hunters, so it's men who have to eat most of the meat. These are always things that go on. Even in just standard society, Look at how many in just regular, relationships, a lot of women will just defer to men and just give them more meat because meat is more male. And then also, if you've ever been a man or masculine coded in some sense and vegan, you will experience a lot of discrimination. Like, you will experience from a lot of people, you will experience homophobia and misogyny. Myself, I have been getting that for years and years and years, because I was like vegetarian from 13, and then I had a brief period in which I ate meat again because it was just easier with regards to my fiance, but now I've gone back to not eating meat. But I was vegetarian, then vegan. But when I first became vegetarian, so many people would be like, oh, but that's a chick thing. Or they would use homophobic slurs to describe, a guy who doesn't eat meat. It is very much connected to masculinity. The idea, like, it's okay to be a woman and not eat meat, but it's not okay to be a man and not eat meat. You will be attacked for it. It's just like a thing that happens. Okay, so the next point here, eating meat is not inherently wrong. I agree. I don't think eating meat is inherently wrong. I actually have nothing against the consumption of meat itself. What I have a problem with is specifically the way in which we gather that meat. Like, if something died naturally and you ate it, I would see nothing wrong with that. I don't see how that's wrong. Like, personally, I would love, and I don't think it's even legal to do this, which sucks because it's my body, but anyway, I would actually love if when I die that my body could be fed to animals. But that's probably not legal, annoyingly. But it's fine, whatever. I don't see eating meat as inherently wrong. But the thing is, the way we breed animals, the way we confine animals, this is also why whenever people are like, oh no, but they kill the animal so quickly. The death is not what matters, it's the life. The animal lives a life of suffering. The death is actually the final mercy, the only real mercy it's ever received. I would say the death is the best thing you can do to an animal that is inside that kind of a situation. And that kind of sucks, doesn't it? The fact that the best thing you can do for an animal in that kind of situation is for it to die, in my opinion. The actual consumption of the flesh, I don't think is a bad thing. It's natural. But what we do and how we confine animals, I would say, is very unnatural. That is, for those people who care about the natural argument, which I don't, but it's very unnatural, the way we do it. And then also, of course, I would just say it's wrong. We don't have to do this, right? Which then some people will also try and bring up that whole thing of, oh, well, some countries have to eat meat still. Yes, I'm not talking about those countries. I'm talking about the countries that probably have the bandwidth necessary to watch a YouTube video. It's not an argument that you can make if you live in America, generally speaking. I don't live in America, but, if you live in America, you probably do actually have the infrastructure in place to not eat meat. So it's not really an argument that you can make personally. You're just making that argument to try to absolve yourself of it. But that, whatever. This goes into the next thing, the whole idea of having respect for the meat you eat. I very respectfully, actually disrespectfully, say absolute nonsense. Anyone who makes that argument, absolute nonsense. No, so long as you have respect for the meat you eat, if you buy meat from a supermarket that has been factory farmed, fundamentally you do not respect the meat. You don't. You do not respect the meat. You might say, oh, well, I pray to my God about this meat. Okay. Does that absolve you? Does that mean that the animal didn't go through suffering for it? Having respect for the meat you eat means nothing if that's your argument. If it's a completely verbal argument saying, oh, well, if I just respect the animal that I'm eating, how are you possibly respecting it when you are eating it in this particular manner? So that is just a nonsense argument. It's a very flawed argument. It's a very weak argument. If you personally hunt meat, maybe I would say you have respect for it. But even then, do you really? Because you're taking its life. Does that mean that you respect it? Can you respectfully take a life outside of euthanasia? Right? Because, like, for instance, nearly a year ago, like, at the time of recording, in 3 days, it will have been a year since I put down my dog. She was 16 years old. she could not, it was the very last day, like the day before she could still walk. That day she could no longer walk. I put her down. So I did kill her. But I would say that that was respectful. I was taking her life at the moment in which life was too difficult to live. However, if you kill an animal in the prime of its life, is that respectful? Like, just think about what the actual word respect means, rather than just it being a word that comes off of your tongue because you need a defense. Is it actually respect? Like, think about the word itself. Think about what that word actually means. Can you have respect for something when you kill it unprovoked and for no real reason, other than because you want to eat it? Is that respect? And if you try and say, well, lions do it, lions don't have a concept of respect. So if you want to just say, oh, it's natural, then please don't use a gun. I would like you to actually hunt with your bare hands. That would be, more in keeping with being an animal. But, most people won't do that because that's really difficult. That's really difficult. You need a gun to even the playing field because it's almost as if we're not evolved for it. Anyway, next one. Contemporary society is more against meat eaters than vegans. One of the most hilarious things I've ever heard in my entire life. That is the most pointless... That's actually, I don't like to use this word, but that is a stupid statement. Saying, oh, people are so against meat eaters. No, they're not. Meat eating is the predominant thing. Vegans are much more attacked than meat eaters. If you eat meat, the only people you're going to be attacked by are vegans. And there's not as many of them around. So that's just silly. That's just a stupid statement. Which then goes into the next one. I have seen this particular argument. It's not even an argument. It's just a childish little fit of rage that I've heard from so many meat eaters. It's the, you vegan, so me eat more meat. It's that thing of like, oh, you're vegan, so I'm going to eat double the amount of meat so that it means nothing. You're just wanting to be cruel. That's all you're doing. When you say that, I will lose all respect for you because that's, first off, childish. It's also stupid. It's also just mean-spirited. Someone doesn't want to eat meat because they want to be more ethical, right? And your response is, oh, well, then I'm going to try to negate what you are trying to do by being crueler. And I would say that if you are someone who's ever made that statement, I think that you should actually look internally and think about what kind of a person you are. Because I would say that you're not a good person. If you try and say that kind of a thing. It's just mean-spirited, cruel, and also fundamentally stupid as an argument. Just fundamentally stupid. Like, you have no actual argument, so your argument is just be cruel. But whatever. Go for it. Go for it, my friend. Eat as much meat as you want. So, next one is the consensual animal products one. So, Beastars and consensual animal products. Something to just immediately say. So many people in the responses to this didn't actually mention the kind of the main thing I was really talking about, where I was talking about this as a labor issue. Because then, so the first one here, eggs are naturally laid. Milk requires pregnancy. I'm like, yes. Did you watch the video? Because that's actually not what I was saying. What I was saying was that these things, which are presented as being natural, now also just say, cows in the real world require being in pregnancy or near pregnancy or just after pregnancy to be able to produce milk, which often means they need to be kept in a perpetual state of lactation. That is the reality of meat in the real world. That's not how it's presented in Beastars. It seems to just be that cows can produce milk. That just seems to be what it is. So what I was talking about is that if eggs are just naturally laid by chickens, and if, like, milk is just naturally produced by cows, then it's actually a labor issue. They can be exploited for something that their body can produce. That is what I was talking about. Not about the naturalness of the eggs or the milk. That's not actually part of the argument. I was talking about it as a labor issue. But anyway. Also, some people brought up, for some reason, the concept of obligate carnivores, although the person did call them compulsory carnivores, so I get to now be a pedant and say, they're not called compulsory carnivores, they're called obligate carnivores. Or hypercarnivores is also another term, hypercarnivorism. These are animals that require meat to survive. For instance, the most common one of these that a lot of people have is the domestic cat. Cats are obligate carnivores. They cannot be vegan. Dogs can be vegan. Dogs can be vegan because dogs are not actually carnivores. Dogs are omnivores. They are scavengers. Dogs will literally eat feces. They can survive on a vegan diet. Cats cannot. Cats are obligate carnivores, which means they have to eat meat to survive. They have to. Okay? However, as I did even say in this, I actually don't know exactly which of these videos, but I know I did talk about obligate carnivores in at least one or two of these videos, don't seem to exist in Beastars. They just don't seem to exist. There's a lion character, but there's no sort of statement in the actual narrative that he has to eat meat. It seems that they don't have to eat meat. So I don't think obligate carnivores exist in Beastars. I even talk about that, I think, in my dissertation, where obligate carnivores just don't seem to exist, which goes against the realism of the world. Which, yeah, if you're going to have a relation to the real world, right? But yeah, that's just the thing. So if your argument is, oh well, what about carnivores that have to eat meat? Yeah, in the real world that's an argument, but not in Beastars. Now the next one here is the idea of ethical eggs and milk. I'm sorry, there's no such thing. I know that some people will try to argue, oh no, if you look after the chickens or the cow, and then you look after them and you make sure that they're never harmed and whatever, blah 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 blah. Cool. That's your argument. That's the argument. Oh, but if I look after it and so it's ethical, that still doesn't actually make the eggs and the milk ethical. Like, ethical doesn't mean that, you know, oh, I treated my slaves very well. If you confine chickens and cows, whatever they produce that you take from them cannot be ethical. And also, of course, in terms of milk, are you keeping that cow perpetually pregnant so that you can continue to have milk? In which case, the only way to perpetually keep a cow pregnant is, well, there's a certain word for it that rhymes with grape, but, you know, that word, also artificial insemination, which, you know, you could also use that word, I suppose, if you want to be, if you want to try and be euphemistic about it. But keeping it in a state of lactation kind of requires doing certain things to it that are not very ethical. And you can't really get ethical eggs because you are still fundamentally confining these creatures. It's not so much about the eggs themselves, it's about the confinement of the animals. I've spoken about this before. It's not the death of the animal that matters, it's the confinement of the animal that matters. The life of the animal matters, not its death. So that's just my point there. I could go more into that, but I'm not going to because this video is already longer than I thought it was going to be. So, whoops. Okay. Now the next thing, someone brought up, what about Deshiko, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and Kopi Luwak. Also, that's the little civets or kivets, I also don't know how to say that, little weasel cat creature that eats beans and poops out tasty coffee. They asked why I didn't bring them up in my consensual animal products video, and I did actually respond to them because I didn't think of it. I didn't think of it. It's also just, I think, much less interesting in terms of Beastars when it comes up because it's very much a luxury item. Now, obviously, in the real world, the animals that are confined to produce this luxury coffee are tortured, kept in battery cages, stuff like that. So, in the real world, it's very much not consensual. But, yeah, I just didn't think of it when I was talking about consensual animal products. Also, probably because most people are familiar with eggs and milk. Most people aren't familiar with luxury coffee. Yeah, that's probably why. Anyway, the next one. Someone asked me why do Shishigumi become emaciated under melon if you know they're not eating meat, so now they become emaciated. It's never suggested that they have to eat meat. They're on an only meat diet, and when melon takes over, he basically starves them on purpose, and they're too afraid to go against him. That's why they become emaciated. Not because they're undernourished for unrelated reasons. It's because they're afraid of melon. That's literally nothing to do with animal studies. That is like a character thing. Anyway, the next one, how dare you mention Marxism? There was someone who criticized the fact that this has had some Marxist analysis in it. I was talking about labor relations. Of course it has Marxism in it. That's really all I'm going to say there. When you're going to talk about class, wealth, these kinds of things as an analysis, Marxism is the theoretical framework you would use. That's just how it works. And the last point here is a bit of a weird one, because someone randomly mentioned trickle-down economics. I think in relation to the fact that I said in it when Yafya, whatever, I know him was Yafya because that's the translation I had always seen for like a long time. The Beastar, the actual Beastar character, he gives the carnivore managers at the milking factory place, he gives them money instead of actually doing anything about the situation that the cows are in, and I criticized that. So this person said, what about trickle-down economics? Now here's the thing. I don't know if they're joking or not, because they didn't really follow it up with anything. If they're not joking, trickle-down economics is nonsense. It's not really real. It doesn't work. If they were joking, I find it very funny. If they're being serious, I also find it funny. But I just figured that I'd say that because for some reason someone decided to bring up trickle-down economics in my little Beastars video, and I don't actually know why. So, fun little thing. Now, the last of the videos is the terrible ending of the World of Beastars. Now, also, important to note, I'm talking about the ending of the World of Beastars, not the ending of the main plot, because that's fine. I don't really care. But the ending of the world sucks. Now, in that, basically, this big whale, he offers a fish sausage to Yafya, the Beastar, and says, oh, this can solve the whole meat problem. Now, here's the first thing where it says, yeah, but Yafya didn't accept the fish sausage. I know that. I do know that. A bunch of people told me that, oh, he didn't accept the fish sausage. And I kind of knew I was going to get this kind of comment ahead of time, because I was like, yeah, I didn't actually say that he didn't accept it, because I thought it was implied. I was talking about the fact that the offer itself is a bad idea. Not that it was accepted. It was a bad idea, which still leads to it being a bad ending, because there is no conclusion then. There is no solution to the problems of this world. There's just nothing, which it's still a terrible ending. Regardless of these, it's terrible because that was offered, and it's terrible that there's no solution in response to it, which is great. Someone else also said, well, maybe Yafya doesn't understand the philosophy of the ocean like Legacy does. Yafya is the Beastar. He is like the most important person in the world. He is personally, not necessarily friends, but he personally knows this extremely important whale character from, the world. I'm pretty sure he knows about the philosophy of the ocean more than Legacy does. We aren't shown that, but I would presume that he knows more. So, yeah. Someone also just said, why are there no children? Or at least they said something about there not being children. I would just say there's no children because having children in a story like this complicates things more, so you rather just keep everyone older. Also, it's anime/manga, so everyone's obviously a teenager. That's just how anime goes. You can't possibly have adults doing things. It has to be teenagers. Anyway, the next one. Why didn't the carnivores go for the herbivores when all the lights went out? Because aren't they starting to change? No, I would say that's not the case. The reason the carnivores didn't go for all the herbivores is because there are actual major consequences to going for a herbivore and eating them. It's not like the society has changed. The police still exist in this particular the time in which the lights go out and all the herbivores are terrified and then the carnivores protect them. And also, it would be a stupid idea to immediately start eating someone. Like, the lights go out. Are they going to be out for 4 days or are they going to be out for 30 seconds? You don't know. It would be a very, very dumb idea of you, if you are a carnivore, to immediately try and eat someone. You do not have the time. You don't know how long you have. So I would say that doesn't really prove anything about the way that the carnivores are, in my personal opinion. Now, the next one, someone was like, oh, but the world is imperfect, like the real world. So why wouldn't the end of Beastars world also be imperfect? There isn't, but this is presented as a possible solution. Also, minor spoilers, but also the black market gets pulled down at the end and the word meat gets outlawed. Like, they're trying to imply that things are going to get better, but there is no actual path to them getting better. They're just making restrictions, and restrictions don't actually make things better. They usually, things just go underground again. There will just be another black market. So it's a bit, yes, it is imperfect, but that I can still criticize it. So I just see that as a little bit of the unnecessary comment. The next one, the anime might fix the ending. We'll see. So far, I kind of think that the anime is trying to do things, which I will speak about when I speak about the season 3 stuff. It's trying. I think it's trying to fix some things. We'll see. We'll see how part 2 of season 3 goes. I got this comment, and this comment kind of makes me laugh because I just think it's a bit silly. Someone was like, "Oh, well, carnivores have to eat meat because otherwise the ecosystem will become unbalanced." Yes, in the real world, there isn't an ecosystem in Beastars. It's a city. If the carnivores all stopped eating meat, then things would just carry on. In the real world, in nature, this is an argument that you can make, but not in the world of Beastars. And I didn't make the argument that carnivores in the real world shouldn't be eating meat. I've never made that argument because it's a stupid argument. So yeah, that's just something to this goes again into those the thing of people don't pay attention to what they're watching, and then make comments that don't actually make sense with regards to what's happening. It's very strange. Yeah. So anyway, the next one: why don't they eat insects? They do. Someone was like, "Oh, why they should eat insects?" They do eat insects. Insect protein is used in Beastars. They speak about it like right at the beginning. Like it's when they go to the cafeteria, they're like, no, they eat like eggs and milk, which gets them their protein or what have you, and they also have insect like flour. They do eat insects. So yeah. And then also someone was like, what about why don't they have synthetic meat as an alternative? It is an alternative, it's just not in the series. So that's the answer there. And yeah, so that's the end of my sort of comments on the comments, well, as I called the video, my responses to the responses to my Beastars videos. So now let me talk about Season 3, Part 1 stuff. Now, let me immediately just say, Beastars is a series that when I first watched Season 1, and then I read all of the manga, and then I watched Season 2 when it came out. I think the second half of Beastars, basically what happens, the stuff after Season 2 essentially, it becomes progressively weaker and weaker and weaker. Poor planning, lack of foreshadowing, the very nature of the manga industry as a whole, the fact that it overstayed its welcome, it has underdeveloped ideas like hybrids. Also, this is just a personal thing, it became increasingly shonen, which I didn't like. I felt it became more and more shonen, more about fighting, which, I found boring. However, I did still like the music. The music is still pretty great. I would say that they're trying to fix some things, right? Because I do think that the second half of the manga is really weak. It gets weaker as it gets closer to the ending. But I can see that for this anime adaptation of this season, they're trying to change the pacing and the order of some things, because things were really, really poorly laid out before. Like, they're trying to really, really focus on this, narcotic thing, and that there's the advanced class that Jack's a part of, although they mention it and then they drop it because it's going to come up later. They also got rid of some of the neighbors. The introduction to Seven was changed, and also I think that she was also dropped quite a bit. We did get quite a bit of Sagwan, which was nice, but some things were just weaker, I think. And I also personally think that Melon is a much, much weaker villain in the anime than he is in the manga. I think in the manga he is, because one of the things is that he's shown as violent and scary. I don't really think that works. I don't think that he's just he's a violent guy, he beats them up because he's stronger than them. It's more what always felt in the manga they were scared of what he would do because he would do something scary to him. Not that he'd beat them up, but that he'd like do something horrible to them, which I kind of felt wasn't shown. They did also really draw out his introduction, which I actually think was a kind of a good idea, although they did weaken some of it. Like, he kills the beggar for some reason, but you don't see him killing the elephant, which I just think is kind of a weak thing. Also, obviously, I'm coming at this from someone who knows the manga very well because I, did my dissertation on it, so, understands. And that's fine. And then there's some things like there's the fighter rabbit who you haven't actually seen, but you've seen mentions of them, because they're going to come up later, and I'm very curious about how they're going to handle that stuff, because I will say that the stuff that's going to be in Season 3, Part 2, is the weakest Beastars material. It is in terms of the manga, to me, in my opinion, obviously. It is the weakest stuff. It kind of sucks. So, we will see what happens. I hope it doesn't suck too much. I really hope it doesn't suck too much. I hope that they fix it. But we will see. We will see. That's really all I actually have to say about Season 3, Part 1 so far. But yeah, if you do have other questions, you can always put them here, especially if you've gotten this far in, unless you've skipped to this part. Now for sort of my closing sort of discussions here, just to ask... it seems this has definitely been my most successful run of videos. I've got over 100 videos, and these ones, this has been my most sort of successful run of videos. So, and some people said, oh, you must do a video on Gohin. I didn't plan on making videos about individual characters and what have you. I have plans for what's happening next year. I'm finishing off because basically if you look at my videos that I've made, there's a lot of lecture videos. They're basically just a still screen me talking about a concept for very academic things. It's literally specifically for the UNISA Theory of Literature undergraduate course. I made videos about all of it, and I'm finishing the rest of them this coming year, 2025. It's going to be the end of it, and there are no more lecture videos that I'm thinking of, at least. So, yeah. But that's mostly what I've made right before, a lot of that kind of stuff. I did make video essays way back, and then this coming year is also going to be a bunch of short form gaming analysis videos. But I thought it could be interesting to look at more Beastars and also maybe more furry stuff, furry and animal stuff, because animal studies is my thing. So if people are interested in that, I would love people to just tell me. Do you like the idea of more videos about Beastar stuff? Because also, if you also want more stuff right now, there is my MA. You can read my dissertation. It's linked down below. You can read it. And there's also some things which I could have made videos about, which I didn't. For instance, the depiction of social media in Beastars. Also, specifically, the depiction of race in Beastars, which I only hinted at. I didn't actually have a definitive video about it. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, if you like this kind of stuff, please tell me if you would like to get more of this kind of stuff. Yeah, but that is the end of this particular run of videos. And yes, that is it. So, if you enjoyed this stuff, you can check out my Patreon. That's also linked below. You can also check out my books, which is also linked below, because I am a writer. All of my books, you can get ebooks of all of them, including, actually, you can get get any of the ebooks for free if you download them on itch. Because I don't actually believe in gating art behind paywalls. So if you want to buy any of my books, you can. If you want to just download them for free and read them, you can also do that. More than happy. I don't really care. So yeah, that's about it. So you can do those things. And otherwise, I hope that you have a great day, week, and month ahead. And goodbye.